perfectly respectable, everybody. There you are. Amala Yodin's here, and that's part of the reason. Anyway, so welcome everybody. Welcome back. Welcome Apida and Dantachitta, looking bright as ever, having neither of them slept for the last numerous days. Welcome everybody. Yeah, really good to see you. Particularly welcome to those who I don't know so well. It's not everybody I know so well. Yeah, welcome to you. Very good. And welcome if you're tuning in on YouTube. Are people tuning in on YouTube?
Yeah.
Is there anyone to mention?
They haven't mentioned themselves yet.
Oh yeah, well do mention yourself on YouTube.
They are there, but they're just being quiet.
It's good to be quiet sometimes. But yeah, especially if you're from far afield, do mention. We've got a very strong Australian contingent. People have got their cups of tea, that's good to see. I've got
Sam says hi from Rochester in Kent.
Rochester, that's fairly far afield, isn't it? That's good.
Maitreyabandhu.
Oh, hello.
Would you say hello to the Stroud Mitra group? They're watching you on YouTube.
Oh, are they? Hello to the Stroud Mitra group.
Thank you.
Yeah, a big shout out for the Stroud Mitra group.
Aidan, Rebecca and Richard.
Rebecca and Richard.
Aidan, Rebecca and Richard.
Aidan, Rebecca and Richard. Yep, that's who they are. It's now becoming a sort of, does anyone else want to do shout?
James's mum is here again.
James's mother is here again. James's mother might feel that she's an individual in her own right.
Okay.
People often do. Ah, Shobit. Oh, how nice to see you, Shobit. I can't see you, of course, but Shobit, they're over there in India, so that's wonderful that you're here, Shobit. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to know you better. We're getting to know you, aren't we, through doing the course that Yanavatra, Subhadramati and I are doing in India. So welcome to you. And welcome Amalavajra. Where am I? Avishtana seems a bit less without you here, Amalavajra. Yeah, you've been such a wonderful presence here. I mean, it's marvelous here, don't get me wrong. Be very careful with these. A bit less from, and then actually. Yeah, can we just take that off the YouTube?
Anita from Manchester says hi.
Oh, it's good to have Manchester. Is it raining in Manchester? Because it's been very sunny here. As Dianata will know, it's normally raining in Manchester. Anyway, welcome everybody.
And Padma Pushpa and Akasha Mati from New Zealand.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's great. Padma Pushpa and Akasha Mati from New Zealand. That's really good to have New Zealand. Hello, there you are. That's really good. I didn't realize we had anyone from New Zealand. That's great. I feel a bit of a connection with New Zealand. I go there quite often. So, yeah, so that's lovely. That's great. Okay, so no more special requests. So I'm going to start introducing the second of these great myths, the myth of self-surrender. Before I do that, Matt Drage, a friend of Yanavatra and I, has been watching on YouTube. Hello, Matt, if you're there. I hope you're well. He's been sending us long messages about how we could improve. I mean, he means it in a nice way. And what's frustrating is he's very often right.
We did ask him.
We did ask him as well. So it's not unreasonable. You know, we did say, do let us know what you think, but we were just being polite. Kind of English. You know, you often say to people, oh, do tell me what you think. What you mean is just say it was wonderful and leave it at that. But no, we get long messages telling us precisely what he thinks. But one of the things he was saying is, you know, have we really understood? Is there? I don't know whether I can. Matt is much cleverer than I am, much brighter than I am. But he was talking about have we really grasped this question of views? So I thought I'd try and say a little bit more about views in this talk, and also try and say a little bit more about, if I can, about what we mean by literalism as I go through. So I think basically that the issue of views, and I always use metaphor. I'm much better with metaphors. I'm trying to do equations. And did anyone notice my equations from earlier in the week? Apparently it has to have an equals in it. Anyway, never mind. I should keep well away from maths. What was I saying? Yeah, so I think we think of, I think our habitual assumption is we have experience, something called experience, and then within experience we have views. Yeah, a little bit like you have a tank of tropical fish, and the water and the environment is our experience, and then we've got some fish that are our views, and if we're careful we can notice a wrong view and a right view and so on. I think that's our basic assumption. Actually, it's the other way around, that our views are the tank that create our experience. It's much more like the view is the tank. It creates the form in which experience arises. Jan Evanchen will correct me about this probably later on, but if you had no view, if you were a Buddha, it's very difficult to talk about experience at all, because experience has to have an experiencer and an experienced. Yeah? So I think it's the opposite to our assumption that views actually create experience, or they're the context in which what we call experience unfolds. Yeah? That's a posh way of saying, slightly posh way of saying, it's the context in which life unfolds. Except for we think life is a given, a neutral, something that happens to me. We don't realize it's something that we're shaping and constantly reshaping, giving birth to by view. Yeah? So my little example of this, sometimes it's much better if you can find an example, is my partner, who's from New Zealand, and that's why I have that connection, from Pukeru Bay. Do you know Pukeru Bay? Just down from Wellington. His oldest daughter, Alex, when she was about, she's nearly 14 now, but when she was about 7, one of the things we used to do together, we used to draw together, right from when she was tiny. When she was about 7, she stopped drawing, and her mother contacted me saying Alex has stopped drawing. And it was quite striking, she loved to draw and paint, as children do, and then she just suddenly stopped. And the reason she'd stopped drawing is because Martha, her friend, who was also about 7, said that she wasn't any good at drawing. Yeah? Martha just said, you can't draw. And Alex completely took that to heart and then stopped drawing. And she just wouldn't draw after that. So it was quite an interesting experience. So I said, well, what does Martha know? Because of course, when you're 7, you think you've lived forever and have seen everything. So there was no way of arguing, well, look, she's just 7 like you, so she won't know. So I said, look, I went to art school for 3 years, and I know you can draw. And she looked at me and said, yeah, likely story. As far as she was concerned, I went to art school in a period of prehistory. And also I could see she was thinking, no, you're just trying to encourage me. It's not really true. You're just trying to encourage me because you want me to draw. But I try to use these different arguments. No, I can draw, and I know that you can. So I don't think Martha, but she'd completely taken on Martha's view. And of course, what happens then, because she did do a bit of drawing, but what happens then is you've got this idea that you can't do it. So anytime you draw anything, most of what you draw, whether you're Picasso or Alex, goes a bit wrong, and you're correcting it all the time. But as soon as you go a bit wrong, if you think you can't draw, it confirms your feeling that you can't draw. Yeah? And even if it goes right, you start saying, well, that was a fluke because I can't do it. So what happens is then when I come and say, well, let's do some drawing, what you start to have is anxiety, unease, and a feeling of being forced to draw. And if I'm then saying, well, I went to art school, so I know, you feel like he's actually pushing me to draw. Yeah? So do you see, if it would have continued, gradually she would have forgotten that she was told that she couldn't draw by a friend. who's hardly Lucy and Freud herself, I can tell you, with her drawings. She'd have forgotten that, and she'd carry on going to school, and then she'd feel uneasy when you draw, and then easily discouraged, etc. And before you know it, it would have just been true that I can't draw. It would have been a reality. It wouldn't have been a view she had. It would be just experience. And her experience would be continually confirming itself, because when it keeps going wrong, and that shows you that I can't draw. And as I say, even when you do a good drawing, you think, well, that was just a fluke. You find ways of making your so-called experience fit your view. Actually, what I ended up doing is I said, okay, well, you don't need to draw, that's fine. I'm going to draw a picture for your grandparents. And I sat there drawing this nativity scene. And then she jumped up on my lap and watched me drawing, and then gradually started joining in with me drawing. And I didn't say anything. I was careful not to say anything. I was just doing it. And then she gradually joined in with me drawing. And it's so poignant. And suddenly she just stopped and looked at me and she said, I don't know why I believed Martha. And I said, no, I don't know why you believed Martha either. And then from then on, she could draw again. But it's it's a sort of small example, but to see how it would become just her experience. That's something she can't do. Other people can, you end up with a whole, I'm not an arty type, I'm a this type, I'm not a that type. It just becomes what you call experience, whereas actually it's created by view. So that's a small example, but that goes all the way through our life now. And our life is shaped by that here and now. So I don't know whether that clarifies a bit more why Bhante has talked so much about views. They're absolutely crucial. And you can see they're not primarily intellectual. They're not primarily intellectual either. They're much more like a shaping context which our life conforms to and reiterates, sometimes with terrifying effects. But you have to think more about that as we go on. So that's my little attempt to answer Matt, saying, can we talk more clearly about view, what we mean by view? So what we're going on to today is self-surrender. And this is the metaphor of that the unconditioned is outside the conditioned, and it's reaching down to us, So the metaphor of self-development or self-transcendence is that the unconditioned is outside the conditioned, and we progress towards it. That's one way of moving towards the unconditioned. This is saying, as it were, that the unconditioned is above the conditioned and is reaching down into the conditioned. That's what this metaphor is saying, and we've brought Tara onto the shrine as the embodiment of that practice, that sense of the unconditioned reaching down into the conditioned. Bhante in seminar is always saying that Tara is the safe bodhisattva. Somebody once said in a seminar, if I feel kind of a demonic force, should I evoke Padmasambhava? And he said, no, you might not even be able to manage the demons transformed by Padmasambhava. What you need to do is evoke Tara. She'll always help, and it'll always be, it'll always be helpful. So Tara represents par excellence that the unconditioned, always reaching into the conditioned. She's supposed to be the quick one, isn't she? She's always, the other figures traditionally, if you haven't been doing their sadhana, they won't respond to you. Tara will always respond. She's the quick one. So that's why we've brought her onto the shrine. So it's prajna, it's insight, reaching, breaking through into the conditioned and reaching down into us, into our experience. That's what self-surrender really means. So once again, I want to explore some of its strengths and its front and it's back to some degree. First of all, I thought it's, for me, I need to keep on going back to my own experience. Otherwise, I sort of feel like I'm making it up. It's, for me personally, I do need to keep on referencing it back to my experience. Otherwise, it can feel a bit like I've made it up, or it's just something I've read. So once again, my ordination retreat keeps coming back to mind. I don't know why. It's very. I think it's ordination is the heart, isn't it, of everything we do. I think everything we do in Triratna is effectively moving toward ordination, and hopefully everything we do after ordination is an expression of ordination. There's only sort of, I think of ordination as a single sacrament of Triratna. I know that's a Christian term, but that's how I think of it. And I was not only lucky enough to have Subhuti and Sivadra on my ordination retreat, Padmavajra was also on my ordination retreat. He'd come straight from India to join the retreat. So he actually came, I think, 2 days late. And I literally met him for the first time in my life, coming out of the robing ceremony. And he was helping me put on my robe. I'd never seen him before. And he was, wonderfully helpful with me taking up the Padmasambhava sadhana. It was Padmavajra that took me through that day by day in great detail. And I still feel very grateful to him for that. And I took on the Padmasambhava sadhana at ordination. I still do it now, 30 years later. And yes, I remember I was so delighted. It felt, until I took on the sadhana, it felt like, I don't know whether you felt this, it felt like my spiritual life wasn't complete. I remember before Jan of Archer was ordained, I remember saying to him in Brighton in the coffee shop, I think you need a sadhana. I think it'll stop you progressing if you don't have a sadhana. So I remember, because I had a very strong sense that when I had my sadhana, I think for me, the explicitly Buddhist nature of the sadhana was really important. I agreed of and approved of mindfulness of breathing and metta bhavana, but what I wanted was to meet Padmasambhava. I was actually very motivated to do that. I thought metta bhavana and mindfulness of breathing was very important, but emotionally I wasn't, I'm afraid, that motivated to do either of them, particularly metta bhavana, but I'll come back to that perhaps one day. But I was very motivated to meet Padmasambhava. And I remember really being delighted to have this practice. And I went for a walk, I think with Nandavadra, who was ordained with me. We were all friends. And I was, in this walk, I was just saying to Nandavadra, oh, it's just so wonderful to have the Padmasambhava sadhana, and just sort of talking about Padmasambhava in a very casual way, how wonderful it was to have the sadhana, oh, look, there's a cat. I was just really, really pleased to have that sadhana. And then doing the sadhana the next day, I was sitting pretty distracted, I'm afraid, doing my sadhana the next day, doing the Padmasambhava sadhana. And I'd evoked Padmasambhava and was trying to do the Padmasambhava sadhana. And I idly thought, and it really was just like a passing distraction, I just idly thought, I wonder whether it's a good thing to rejoice in your sadhana. I remember the thought, I just thought, oh, I wonder whether that's a good thing. And then I had this kind of, like a sort of visionary, it wasn't visionary because it was oral. I just heard this incredible yes. It's interesting because it's exactly like people describe the voice of God. They say it's incredibly loud and absolutely sweet and soft at the same time. And it was exactly like that. It was incredibly loud, coming from all directions at the same time, and ineffably sweet and soft. It was both terrifying and unbearably beautiful. Yeah. And it was such a shock, but it really was just an idle half thought. Remember, I was in the midst of by then I had been on retreat for 2 months, and been meditating a lot. Probably I was much deeper than I'd realized, but I didn't think of myself as deeply into sadhana at that moment. I was just sort of distracted and thinking, I wonder whether it's a good idea to rejoice in your sadhana. But it was very like how I've heard people describe hearing the voice of God. In fact, identical pretty much as ever it was Padmasambhava. And I knew it was obviously Padmasambhava, there's no question about that. So that and other experiences like it, and I wish I could live from those experiences much more than I do, but really, I think I'll capture this sense of the unconditioned reaching into the conditioned. The trouble is it's so far away from our Western sophistication, our much vaunted sophistication. It's so far away from our Western materialism and so on, that it feels sort of alien to us. As I come from a small town, fairly near here actually. I come from a small town called Henley-in-Arden, and I was brought up as in the Church of England. And one thing about the Church of England, it doesn't allow for any kind of religious experience. As Alan Bennett said, it doesn't really matter what you believe, as long as you can organise a tight jumble sale. This is exactly my experience in the Church of England, frankly. I used to sing in church twice a day. So those kind of mystical experience like that, but utterly and sort of not part of my life at all. They still seem some of the most treasured experiences of my life. I was just remembering another one today, which is a different kind of experience. Because sometimes for me, the unconditioned breaking through into the conditioned, and please take this carefully, I don't mean it literally, is actually Bhante, his presence breaking into mine. Just only recently, a newcomer on a retreat, on a class I was running, had done the winter retreat here at Adhisthana and said he had been thinking about an argument with his partner. He said Bhante was suddenly there in his mind talking to him. And I said, do you know anything about Bhante? He said, no, not really, but it was very definitely him. And he was talking to me about this relationship I was having. And I said, how did you experience him? He said, it was mainly a sort of sense of red. But he'd never read any of Bhante's writing. But I remember, I will get onto some points in a moment. I remember being in the community above the centre. This is when I lived in Sakavati, which is quite a long time ago now. So not that long, I presume, after I was ordained. And Bhante was living downstairs in the what is now the admin office. And I'd got up late again. I used to always get up late for meditation and feel anxious and guilty about it. And I was meditating with my shrine, and I didn't meditate for very long because I was late, except for, that feeling. And at the end of the meditation, I opened my eyes, and I had a picture like the picture of Bhante on the shrine here, but the one with the roll neck jumper, and that one that taken at Pamaloka with his robes on. And I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph, and it wasn't a photograph anymore. It was Bhante. And it lasted for quite a long time. But it was, it's weird, it's difficult to describe these experiences, but it still was sort of a photograph. It just wasn't anymore. It was Bhante looking at me, and with the slightest hint of challenge, almost like Padmasambhava, looking at me very intently for ages. And I just sat and looked at him for ages. And eventually I said, hello. It lasted for quite a long time, I remember. So all of these experiences, such as one has, at best open you up to the possibility of this myth of self-surrender. That something can break through seemingly from above your ordinary consciousness into everyday consciousness, can break into your life. And people have had these kind of experiences since the beginning of time, it seems to me. Our modernity, our post-Freudian modernity has problematized it all for us, unfortunately, but there you are. So let's see if I can say a little bit. I don't have so much to say about strengths and weaknesses because in a sense there's something in this myth that doesn't quite so readily open itself to sort of a front and a back. It has a front and a back, of course, but I don't think it's quite as, because of the myth, it's not quite as discernible. But perhaps the first thing to say about it, of course, is that it doesn't rely on self-will. So it's a wonderful, I think all of these myths cover, the front of one myth will cover the back of another. Do you see what I mean? That's why it's so important to have a sense of all three myths, that the front of one myth will cover the back of the other. So the myth of self-development is very much about using your will, and that's very, very important. And there's no real progress without it. Bhante's been very clear about that. But it's Jan Archer and I have been talking, we're saying, even as you talk about it for 2 evenings, you start to think, gosh, we need another myth, don't you? You can't keep on just talking about how you use your will and how you refine your will. I've been struck a while ago, I watched a few of Jordan Peterson's videos online. I know for some people he's very controversial, but I think he's got good points and he's got his own shortcomings. He's very obviously very Christian. And what he talks about again and again really is using your will. He does it in a very nuanced way at best. But if you keep talking about your will, it feels very, well, your psyche just can't bear it. It's like, I need a way out of will. Interesting, I think that's one of the reasons why Bhante's talked about the arts so much, is they're one of the ways of being released from your will, but still being enriched. I think that's one of the reasons why Bhante's talked about the arts. It's not because he thinks we all should be arty. Anyway, the myth of self-surrender doesn't rely on your will, on self-will. And again, Bhante's had a very, very strong sense of this. You see it all the way through his life. You know, where he talks about being guided by Tara, and being, again and again, being guided by a will that didn't feel his own. Subhuti's talked about that in the papers. We talked about the transpersonal, what's it called again? Suprapersonal force, which I always find rather technical. But you can see that it's getting at this sense of being guided by a will not your own. And Bhante clearly felt that very, very strongly for a long time. That seemed to be, in many ways, one of the dominant myths in Bhante's. I don't know whether Sadhaloka's here, Sadhaloka would know better. But it seems to me one of the dominant myths of Bhante's life is being guided by a will beyond his own. So do you see how self-surrender, the front of self-surrender is immediately a corrective to the back of self-development, to the danger of overusing your will that we explored in the last 2 evenings. We all need as many situations as possible where it feels like we can just let go of willing, and forces outside of ourselves, outside is a metaphor, but so is inside a metaphor. You know, if you cut open the brain, there's not an inside. You know, so what we want to do is release willing so that something can work through us. Any artist, any writer, any poet, they know that only too well. They know that the person who writes the poem is not the person who sits down at the computer or with a cup of tea. Like, you know, the poetry of Larkin, of Philip Larkin, the English poet, probably what I would say with Elizabeth Bishop, possibly the greatest late 20th century poet. He basically, I think he's better than Bishop actually, but he just spent his life waiting for a poem to happen. It's quite tragic, his life, because you know, he always thought he should get married. He never got married because he thought it might close the access to the poem. He ended up drinking more and more. It's quite a tragic life. Interestingly, as soon as he became successful, his gifts sort of started to die. You can almost see his gift dying as soon as he bought a car. He used to cycle around on a bike. As soon as he bought a car, gradually less and less poems came. And he was very acutely aware of it. Or Wordsworth, spent much of the later part of his life acutely aware that the gift had gone, and it largely had gone. It came back in a few poems later on, but not very much. I mean, Wordsworth was remarkable in his equanimity in that he knew full well that he'd lost the gift. It wasn't there. The muse had deserted him. So anyone who writes knows that they're trying to use their will so that something more than their will can step in. That's the whole point. And you see how Western ideas of the muse are the burnt out ends of that, which hardly exist anymore. People so kind of snotty about such things, are the end of our tradition, that there is a will beyond our own, and which we, traditionally, like when Milton would write a poem, the first verse would be a verse to the muse, asking to step into the poem. That's very, very traditional. Of course, nobody does that now, but it's completely right, completely accurate. So do you see how self-surrender is that using will to open up so that something beyond your will steps in? And yeah, in the West, probably the muse is the closest thing we've got, but of course, that's got a ceiling on it. We've got a kind of secular ceiling on that. So it counters ego. It doesn't rely on self-will, and secondly, it counters ego appropriation. Yeah, it's a good way, a corrective to the myth of self development or self transcendence. In that it counters ego appropriation. You can't say that it's something you got. One of the absolutely crucial things about self-surrender is you can't will it. The poet can't will the muse to be there. And there's an American woman poet, I can't remember her name, who seemed to have these experiences that were quite incredible. Like, she talks about walking across a field and feeling the poem coming towards her across the field. And she could feel it coming, and she'd run back to her house, and it would be going past her as she ran back to her house. And then it would go past her house, and she'd have to write, and she started writing the poem backwards to try to remember all the things that it said as it had gone past her. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. I haven't had any experience like that myself. But there you go. So she wouldn't have thought, well, that was me running. It counters ego appropriation. Is that if a poem isn't something you can will, so the appearance of the yidam isn't something you can will. The suprapersonal force, if you want to use that language, which I say I personally, I agree with, but find a bit technical to my taste. So yeah, the second thing about strength of this myth of self-surrender is it counters ego appropriation. The third thing that I thought, actually, whilst I've been reflecting here, is that it makes it really clear, I hope, that Buddhism is beyond this dichotomy of secular and divine. Yeah. I do think one of the great dangers to modern Buddhism, at least in the so-called developed world, is the secularization of Buddhism. And I think this is slipping in, if we're not careful, more and more subtly and even insidiously. The idea of a secular and a divine is a Christian idea. It really is a Reformation idea. I think it was that great split where you had to split the church from the state because the church and the state were completely mixed up, and Luther, and all kinds of nonsense was going on because of that, and Luther had to, wrench them apart. So you have a secular and you have a divine. Of course, originally, a secular just meant not a divine. So it just meant it was a library, not a church. That's all it really means. But if we're not careful, we interpolate that into Buddhism as if we could talk about, secular, even horror upon horror secular Buddhism, which I personally find an insult. I want to tell people to wash their mouth out with soap and water, like my mother used to say to me. you have a secular, if you're not careful, you have a secular and divine. That's a Christian idea. Buddhism doesn't have either. It doesn't have a literal divine in the sense of a deity that literally exists outside of consciousness, nor does it have anything that it thinks of as being secular and not reachable by the divine, as it were. So I hope, at least, that this myth of self-surrender could help us out of this cul-de-sac of secularism, which just, my argument about it is it's just not big enough for us. Irrespective of Buddhism, I don't think it's big enough for the human psyche. I don't think psyche is secular, as it were, to use that language. Again, just going back to poetry, something I do know something about. Seamus Heaney was saying that he thought that poetry was the one art form that could never be secularized. It somehow won't ever become secular. It's always a poem that you'll read at a funeral or something. You won't bring in a painting or a video projection. It will be a poem. But there's something about the poem that doesn't want to be secularized. And I think that because the secular doesn't give enough room for us. It doesn't give enough room for poetry, for prayer, for song. I mean, even I think falling in love doesn't, especially when you're young, doesn't feel like a secular experience. It feels like at times like a cataclysmic mystical experience. Dreaming, etc. You know, if we're not careful, we're putting limits on the human psyche, and I don't think the human psyche wants limits. But yes, we've got this sort of idea left over from Reformation Christianity of a secular as opposed to a divine, and Buddhism doesn't have either. So hopefully the myth of self-surrender for many people could help them with that impasse, because lots of people feel the narrowness of a secular worldview and would like to get out of it, but can't find a way out of it that they believe in, that they can give themselves to. And then my third area that I think, or the front, as it were, the strength of this myth of self-surrender is that it really obviously includes the heart. It's a heart matter, isn't it? It's interesting that we've linked in our mind the dukkha reflections with the self-surrender. They're both matters of the heart. Yeah? And you see that if we are becoming more and more heady in the sense of being more and more stuck in propuncture, and that now we're also stuck in technology, which is a kind of externalized propuncture. Our mind is very like a YouTube channel, isn't it? You know, when this, if you're watching this on YouTube, when it finishes, it'll suggest other things that you tend to want to watch, and that's what our mind can be like, can't it? You think of one thing, and then when you stop thinking of that thing, 8 more stories a bit like that come up that you tend to watch. Yeah? Seems to me that our mind is, the YouTube channels are a brilliant mirror of our mind, our propuncture. Yeah? So yes, it's really clear that the myth of self-surrender is a heart opening. It's the desire is to be touched by something beyond us. I think of it as a strongly religious sense. I've come to prefer that language of religious and spiritual in some ways, possibly just being cussed. But I remember somebody talking about their meditations, and I was sort of struggling to say what I was trying to do in meditation, and I said, I think I'm trying to have a religious experience. You know, like that experience of Padmasambhava saying yes, or the Bhante appearing from his photograph, or in another experience I had when I sort of became Vajrasattva. When you have any touch of those kind of experiences, and even when you have the much lesser experiences, when something steps into a poem, or you see a piece of art that transports you, you don't just feel satisfied by it, you feel that that's what life's about. You know, when you have very strong aesthetic experiences that really feel like you're transported, where you really feel that the transcendent is pouring into you, you feel, I mean, one of the reasons why people take the arts so seriously at times is because it feels like you've touched the very meaning of life. So it's clearly a heart opening, clearly a heart opening. So those are, I think, some of the strengths, some of the front of this this myth. And you can see already, even as I talk about it, I can feel it in my body as like a salve to the myth of self-development. It's like, oh, I really need this. I remember on my first weekend retreat, I was on, I was in Hemel Hempstead in what is now a monastery, isn't it? I can't remember. Never mind. It's freezing cold, and I had all these ideas about meditation. I'd read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I was going to break through, but the moment that touched me most was when the leader, who was Jayamati then, I will remember him, said, "We're now going to light the shrine. We're going to do a ritual." And they turned the lights down and they lit all the candles, and something in my heart just opened immediately. I hadn't expected that at all, in a little tiny way, it was that sense of, oh, what a relief. Because until then, I thought all of this Dharma thing was like going to be very Zen. It was going to be discipline, 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 work, 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 breakthrough. And to light candles and to burn incense and to make offerings, it was such a salve to that. It really was. But of course, wonderful though this myth is, and absolutely crucial though it is, it has its own back. Inevitably has its own back. So the epitome, of course, of self-surrender is our sadhana practice. But really, of course, it's the first thing to say about its back is it's not easy to do, is it? I rather wish I had more of the kind of experiences I've talked about than I do. I rather hoped I'd be that kind of visionary type, and I'm not. And you can see that you could end up, once again, feeling like it doesn't happen to me. So many of my friends have these experiences much, much more than I do. And you can end up feeling, well, it doesn't happen to me. And that can create a kind of almost cynicism and closeness to those worlds because you feel not invited to that particular party. But also, for self-surrender to work, to live in you, the bodhisattva needs to appear as a living reality in your life, so that you can allow them to enter you. And that's not easy to do. You know what it's like doing your sadhana. You do all you can. You try and put the figure there, the white, the blue sky, the lotus, the three robes, in my case, a trident. But that doesn't mean to say it becomes this figure. So it's not easy to do. You need some experience of the bodhisattva. And how are you going to get that if you're locked in a sort of a secular mindset? And even if you want to get out of it, I think I can be locked in that mindset. And I do want to get out of it. It feels like it's an expression of my life, that I've come from a very secular world and have yearned for something beyond that. It's not easy to have this sense of the yidam being out there and you just open to it. If only one had that sense more. When I learned sadhana, I think, in some ways very well. I had Subhuti and others teaching me, but certainly I think I took it up very much in the spirit of kind of self-development rather than self-surrender. So I spent years of my life trying to get the figure up there. Because the traditional teaching of sadhana is that first of all, you need to get an eidetic image. You try to get an image that's as clear and stable as possible of the yidam, in my case, with the vajra, with the skull cup, with the trident, with the three skulls, with the yogi's feather, etc., etc. So I used to spend every meditation trying to get into that eidetic image. using a lot of will. You see what I mean? And actually, I found I just came to the end of that, and for a while I stopped doing my sadhana because it just made me feel tense. Because I had to get this, picture with all these parts of, and I kept on trying to do it again. I'm very dutiful as a person, I think. Dutifully trying to do as I understood I'd been taught. And of course, even that you see him. Have you noticed that when you do your sadhana, sometimes you try and see him, and you notice you're screwing up your eyes, as if you are literally trying to see something. And of course, when you say you see Padmasambhava or Manjughosha or Tara, it's a metaphor, but we weirdly we're not very skilled with metaphor. And we either denigrate them or we take them literally. So I think I learned sadhana in that rather, let's get every piece in place so that then it could step into that. And I just burnt my will into it, if you see what I mean. So you can bring your will and that kind of willed, slightly I think looking back on it, I think I basically slightly forced it a lot and then just couldn't bear doing it. So I stopped doing my sadhana, I think, for about a year or two, and I just did just sitting. I think interestingly, I just did just sitting because I was despaired of self development. I just felt I'm not getting anywhere in my meditation. At the time, just sitting was all the rage, as it were. So I just did that for about a year, and I don't think I made very much progress with that. I didn't find that helpful either. But it was because I'd despaired at the problems of self-development. And I think I'd also brought that into my sadhana practice. Another part of that element of the sadhana, there's the element of it's not easy to do. You need to be able to have a sense of the bodhisattva's presence for you to let it come into your heart and surrender to. So that's not, some people find that not so easy to do. Some people have a facility for it, and sometimes that facility is slightly dubious, but that's another matter. Also, another element of that is that some people just genuinely don't relate to the iconography of these figures very much. I don't think I have very much, really. I tried to, and I wanted to, but I'm not sure that I emotionally have done. People showed me Buddha figures. Yanavacha bought a friend of ours a Tara Rupa, and I really want to love it and feel inspired by it, and I think I should be, but I'm not sure that I am that much. Yet when I see a Fra Angelico angel, I find it deeply appealing, and so on. So not everyone has been able to relate to Indo-Tibetan figures. We've tried, I think, to answer that. We've gone through this whole kind of thought process, haven't we, with sadhana about that. Personally, I don't think it's been very satisfactory. It feels a bit like we've just simply come back down to where we started. Hopefully we've come back to where we started with more understanding of the journey. I hope so. I think, we so much to say about that, but I think we've tried to think, well, how does one relate to figures without the emotional feeling for those figures? And if you're not careful, you can substitute what you would like to feel and what you think it would be good to feel with what you actually feel. And certainly that was part of my response to the Idam. It's not entirely, because I've also had very strong direct experiences of Padmasambhava himself appearing to me. Sometimes, I remember one time I was meditating. In those days, we used to do a very short meditation before supper on Sunday in Sakavati. And I remember I went to lead it. We only had 15 minutes or something. And I just thought, okay, look, I haven't done my sadhana this morning, so let's just say he's there. And then he was, straight away, completely. It was, again, a real shock, And I remember saying to him, I said, oh, it's really nice of you to come. I haven't got much time. I'm really sorry. I've only got 15 minutes, but I don't know why you've come. So like me, like that response. But, it's such a shock again. I mean, I just thought, well, might as well have a go. I didn't really mean it very much. And then there he was in all his glory. So you never quite know. So that not everybody relates to these figures. Yeah, they're not, and we need to use. I don't think there's a way of systematizing that. Actually, probably. I think we each need to find some interface between the Yidam as it comes down to us from the Buddhist tradition and our own imaginative experience. Yeah, and I'm afraid there's no way of teaching you that. You have to find a meeting like that. I wanted to just say one more danger before I say something about where this fits into culture. And that is, well, I put here the danger of sentimentality, but that's really only one side of it. Again, Matt was saying to us that he thought it would be good if we were a bit clearer, if we could be, about what we mean by literalism. So I've been trying to think about that. I think actually, as soon as someone says, "What do you mean by something?" you think, "Well, I mean literalism." It's very difficult to get around it. But Subhuti talks about two kinds of literalism, doesn't he? In the papers, he talks about credulous literalism and gullible literalism. Yeah. So no, sorry, he doesn't. That's too. He talks about. Sorry, he talks. It better. Sorry, scratch that. He talks about dismissive literalism and credulous literalism. That's probably a better way of putting it. Credulous and gullible are pretty much the same thing. So dismissive literalism. So dismissive literalism means where you just won't open up to things beyond your sense of common sense, reason, and so on. Yeah, that you just dismiss things. That like if I talk about that experience of Bhante, you just dismiss it as Maitreyabandhu, just because he feels that for Bhante, he's just projecting and it doesn't really mean anything and he shouldn't say it on video. So you'll find some way of dismissing it because it doesn't fit what you'd like, really. So that's dismissive literalism. Credulous literalism is where you actually go the opposite way. You are credulous about it, you're gullible about it. You think of the Bodhisattva as actually existing in some sort of rather sentimental way. At one time, people used to often ask you, "Oh, who's your sadhana?" And I'd say, I remember people when I was ordained, "Who's your sadhana?" I'd say, "Oh, yes, that makes sense." Like it's your star sign or something, I remember this very camp Scottish man on a retreat once. He turned to me and said, "Who's your favourite Buddha?" And he said, "Is it Amitabha?" I can't do a Scottish accent. "Is it? Oh, he's so warm. He's so warm." But he would literally turn to you and say, "Who's your favourite Buddha?" That sort of tendency to sort of sentimentalize. There was quite a sense of this at one point. I don't see it so much anymore, but I've certainly seen that as if the Yidam was somebody that you could phone. A sort of sentimental, pseudo-magical thinking about it. That, that's Padmasambhava, talking to me or something. That can be really quite unhealthy. I remember once, would you believe it, being asked to meet a vicar, and he was trying to come to terms with his sexuality. And he said to me, "God wants me to look at my sexuality." I wanted to say, "Can we leave God out of it?" How about I need to, not this great kind of, and you sometimes see that, don't you, where people use, Buddhist figures in that terribly trite, rather sentimental way. "Oh, well, you must give that problem to Vajrasattva, but give that problem to Amitabha, and it'll all sort itself out." I just think, could you actually help? Now, there is that you can do that. As everything, you were trying to tread such a narrow path. You can give a problem to your Yidam to sort it out. But my experience of my Yidam, Padmasambhava says, "Well, you know full well what to do about it." Padmasambhava is not going to woo-woo you about it. He just says, "Well, you need to do something about it. You know the answer to that. You don't need me for that." But yeah, there is this danger of sentimentalizing the Yidam, of sentimentalizing self-surrender, which is really an expression of credulous literalism or gullible literalism. It reminds me a little bit of, you can see it taking place in the early Renaissance in paintings, Traditionally, you have the saint, and they have the halo behind them with this beautiful gold embossed circle, don't they? Someone like Masaccio right at the beginning, and a bit before him, someone like Fra Angelica, just this beautiful, they'll be embossed beautifully with gold leaf and so on. And then you got Masaccio, the first sort of great painter that started to move towards what came to be, by the time you got to Courbet realism. And what happens is he moves the head for the first time. So suddenly the saints aren't just sort of full frontal. They start to be able to move in space. They start to exist in space. And you can see them thinking, what happens to the halo? What is it? So then sometimes in Masaccio, it's like a little hat that's sort of balanced on the head. So when you look that way, there's sort of like this funny, like sun, it's like sun hat on your head. You can see them not knowing what to do with it. They're trying to work out actually what is it. And of course, it only works when you've got the hieratic form. It's an aura, But you can see them trying to work out what it was. That's really credulous literalism. And what that's doing, it's misunderstanding the great spiritual truth of it and giving it a literal truth. And that's what it's doing in credulous literalism. You're actually basically sacrificing a great truth for a small literal truth. And that's really what's happening, I think. So that there is something about the halo, I think. I remember at my public ordination looking at Subhuti, and it was almost as if he had a halo, frankly. He seemed to glow. And you can sort of see how it could be eventually painted up as exactly what you see it. But then it gets thought as a thing, and then you create this credulous literalism. Okay, so it's nearly time. I'd better finish. There's lots more to say about that, and Jan of Arch will say more about this tomorrow. But I just wanted to finish with this question of its cultural, Subhuti in his talk and in the paper, in that article for Madhya Mavani, he links each of these myths to a particular cultural period, and so self-development, self-transcendence is linked with the modern, and self-surrender is clearly a pre-modern experience. Yeah, it's a myth that lived through most religious experience until pretty recently. Historically, very recently indeed, it was the dominant myth that you needed to open yourself to God or to the transcendent. That was your job on earth, was to open yourself to those things. And that's why you still got something of that in poetry, because poetry reaches so far back. Calling down the God or the spirit, or that became the muse, to animate the work. Yeah. So that made me feel that one of its potential values is that it's part of an animistic world, isn't it? A pre-modern world is an animistic world, a world in which trees are inhabited by devas and mud sprites. There's mud sprites and water spirits, the sort of world you see in ancient Greek poetry, for instance, where everything is alive and conscious. And Bante's saying, that's a much more accurate view of things, that things are alive. That that famous thing where he says that if Buddhists can't be animists, they can't be Buddhists. There's something about that animistic relationship to things, seeing the world as alive, that enables the Buddha Dharma in some way. Perhaps Jan of Arch might clarify that. But he clearly felt that very strongly himself, and clearly feels it's important for us. And it struck me, just to finish, that this is really what our contribution to environmentalism. What we need, what we have to offer, because it's very striking what Jan of Arch was saying about the forest fires, 10 times worse or whatever than they were. You only have to look at the world and it makes me want to weep. But I don't think that ideology will save the world. I think what Buddhists have to offer is the sense, again, if we could ourselves rediscover it, but not in its sentimentalized form, because of course you end up with this new sentimentalized animism, which is just egotism written over the planet, really, and I find personally distasteful, because if you go deep in yourself, what you notice is the world seems to notice. I remember this solitary retreat I did, where it felt like gradually, as I went deeper in meditation, gradually, the pine trees around my hut at Gukaloka started to turn towards me. I'd go outside and sit, and if I sat there long enough, it felt like very, very imperceptibly that the world would listen to me a bit more, and I would try and listen to it. I think there's some kind of mystical relationship between going deeper and deeper into experience. You find that it's being mirrored back to you outside. So eventually you can't say whether you're going deeper inside or deeper outside. But I think this myth of self-transcendence myth of self-surrender and a more articulated and careful and unsentimental approach that doesn't take us into credulous literalism is one of the things we really have to offer. Can we reanimate the world so that we don't destroy it and thereby destroy ourselves? So that's my understanding so far of this great myth of self-surrender. The main thing I want to leave us with is this salve to self-willing, this salve to materialism and to the narrowness of materialism, to being secular, this capacity it has to bring the magic of our childhood into our adult life, to bring a world that's still lit by wonder and the imagination back into our adult life. Okay, so let's have a break. Let's have what time is it? 8:30. Yeah, let's have a 10-minute break, so you can stretch your legs and so on, and then only too appropriately we'll then conclude our evening by Puja. Before that, I just wanted to say once again, I said this at the start, but I just really want to reiterate, well, the needs of Adhisthana. I'm finding it very striking being here again. I'm so pleased to be here, and again I've been talking to my friends about Bhante again and being close to Bhante and seeing the burial mound. It looks so different, doesn't it? First thing in the morning with the dew, and then mid-afternoon with these cobwebs on the top catching the light, and then in the evening really green, and just how beautiful it is here. And yeah, just to reiterate that Adhisthana really does need money, that crude stuff, lucre, gold stuff. It really does need your help. It's losing a lot of money, and it's really, really important for the whole movement. It's very striking that so many people here from New Zealand or Australia. I'm hoping that for you, Adhisthana feels you're here with us at Adhisthana. So do give to Adhisthana, and also do subscribe to their YouTube channel and share these talks. If you've been valuing these talks, do share them, because it's also something lovely for me, and I know for Yana Vacha, that we can talk like this about such important things with this beautiful shrine, and the Buddha figure that Bhante placed on that shrine. So do give to Adhisthana. Okay, let's have a break, and we'll start again at 8:45.
we'll just give people another moment or so to come back.
Oh no, we're
Sorry, who was that? Hello.
Matt's just commented saying he's enjoying the response to his comment.
That's good.
I wonder if Diana is going to join us for the puja.
That's not fair.
Okay, very good. So welcome back for the puja this evening. And yeah, thank you to Maitreyabandhu. So in the puja this evening, Maitreyabandhu will begin with another reading from Bante's own words about himself, I mean. And then we'll do the sevenfold puja again. And we'll conclude with the Tara mantra tonight, which Caroline will lead here. Okay, so let's salute the shrine. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dhammaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Namo.
So I was very struck by Maitreyabandhu's talk and him saying that view shapes experience, and also him talking a little bit about his experiences of his precious Yidam, Padmasambhava, at the most unexpected times. And it's so easy, I think, particularly when we've been practicing for years, to take for granted practices like our sevenfold puja. We so easily do them by rote, at least I do, speaking for myself. I need to sort of remind myself that I am trying to open up to forces, transcendental forces beyond my ken, and that the puja is one way of doing that. And I need to remember that at times I have had experiences in pujas where that is tangible, and it's particularly sometimes been on order gatherings, order conventions, or where we've gathered in large numbers and done puja together, performed puja together, and created or opened up to something very, very tangible that arises amongst us, through us, but beyond any one of us. On these online retreats that we've been doing at the London Buddhist Centre, when we first started doing pujas online, we were skeptical, frankly, or at least I was, about whether it would have an effect at all, whether it would work. But my experience has been that they can be effective. And the bodhicitta practice, the order bodhicitta practice, I've only done it a few times, but I know that people have found it effective practicing together online. We can create, open up to something beyond us together, particularly if we bear in mind each other, that we are doing this as a collective practice, even though you can't hear everybody. There is, we're united in ways that are way beyond the physical and way beyond normal common sense conceptions of who we are. So let's see if we can open up to that in tonight's puja. Okay, so settling down. When Maitreyabandhu is ready, I'll begin.
In recent years, my main object of reflection has been suffering, especially suffering as inflicted by human beings on one another, as well as on other animals. In particular, I've asked myself why human beings should not only deliberately inflict suffering on other human beings, but also delight in doing so. Indeed, there has seemed to me to be something devilish in the enjoyment of another being's suffering, whether or not inflicted by one's own hand. Some have attempted to explain the phenomena as an inheritance from our animal ancestry. But though animals may kill and eat their prey, they do not, as far as we know, enjoy the infliction of pain as such. Only too often, human beings' enjoyment of the infliction of pain on other human beings is associated with a definite ideology, whether that of Nazism, nationalism, dogmatic religion, communism, or the Hindu system of hereditary caste. Suffering can be inflicted not only by bodily action, whether direct or indirect, but also by means of speech or writing, which can be harsh, abusive, or defamatory. It may pour ridicule or find expression in a supposed joke. To the extent that one deliberately inflicts suffering, and especially when one enjoys inflicting it, one is, to that extent, morally evil. This is not, of course, the whole story. One is also morally good and can enjoy making other people happy, even to the extent of devoting one's whole life to their welfare. Though there is a great deal of suffering in the world, much of it is due not to natural evil, but to the morally evil behavior of other people, especially as supported by this or that ideology. It is not enough, therefore, that we should seek to popularize mindfulness and metta, desirable as that may be. We have also to demolish the wrong views that undergird morally evil behavior. And I suspect that work of demolishing them will be one of Triratna's main tasks for a long time to come.
Sevenfold Puja. Worship. With Mandarava, Blue Lotus and Jasmine.
With Mandarava, Blue Lotus and Jasmine.
With all flowers pleasing and fragrant.
with all flowers pleasing and fragrant,
and with garlands skillfully woven.
and with garlands skillfully woven.
I pay honor to the princes of the sages,
I pay honor to the princes of the sages,
so worthy of veneration.
so worthy of veneration.
I envelop them in clouds of incense,
I envelop them in clouds of incense,
sweet and penetrating.
sweet and penetrating.
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft,
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft,
and pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
and pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels,
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels,
festooned with golden lotus,
festooned with golden lotus,
on the paving sprinkled with perfume.
on the paving sprinkled with perfume.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
Salutation. As many atoms as there are
As many atoms as there are
in the 1,000,000,000 worlds,
in the 1,000,000,000 worlds,
so many times I make reverent salutation
so many times I make reverent salutation
to all the Buddhas of the three eras,
to all the Buddhas of the three eras,
to the Siddhartha,
to the Siddhartha,
and to the excellent community.
and to the excellent community.
I pay homage to all the shrines
I pay homage to all the
and
shrines
places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
and places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
I make profound obeisance to the teachers
I make profound obeisance to the teachers,
and those to whom respectful salutation is due.
and those to whom respectful salutation is due.
Going for refuge. This very day,
This very day,
I go for my refuge
I go for my refuge
to the powerful protectors
to the powerful
whose
protectors,
purpose is to guard the universe,
whose purpose is to guard the universe,
the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge
in the Dharma they have ascertained,
in the Dharma they have ascertained,
which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
Likewise in the host of Bodhisattvas,
Likewise in the host of Bodhisattvas,
I take my refuge.
I take my refuge.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami, dhammang saranam gacchami, sanghang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami. Anatipata verami sekapadam samadhyami aganadana verami sekapadam samadhyami. Amen. Kamesu Mechachara Veramani Sekapara Samadhyami Musavada Veramani Sekapara Samadhyami Suramerya Macha Amartana Veramani Sekaparam Samadhyami Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. Confession of faults. The evil that I have heaped up.
The evil that I have heaped up
Through my ignorance and foolishness.
through my ignorance and foolishness.
Evil in the world of everyday experience.
Evil in the world of everyday experience.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
Standing before them.
Standing before them.
With hands raised in reverence.
With hands raised in reverence.
And terrified of suffering.
And terrified of suffering.
I pay salutations again and again.
I pay salutations again and again.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
Just as it is with its many faults.
Just as it is with its many faults.
What is not good, O protectors?
What is not good, O protectors?
I shall not do again.
I shall not do again.
Rejoicing in merit. I rejoice with delight.
I rejoice with delight
In the good done by all beings.
in the good done by all beings,
Through which they obtain rest.
through which they obtain rest,
With the end of suffering.
with the end of suffering.
May those who have suffered be happy.
May those who have suffered be happy.
I rejoice in the release of beings.
I rejoice in the release of beings
From the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
from the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva
And the Buddha.
and the Buddha,
Who are protectors.
who are protectors.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlighten
And the teaching.
and the teaching.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
Entreaty and supplication. Saluting them with folded hands.
Saluting them with folded hands.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
With hands folded in reverence.
With hands folded in reverence.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter nirvana.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter nirvana.
May they remain here for endless ages.
May they remain here for endless ages.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the birthless, all things take their birth. Yet in that birth, nothing is born. Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the ceaseless, all things cease to be. Yet in that ceasing, nothing ceases. Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the non-abiding, all abides, yet thus abiding, there abideth naught. Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. In non-perception, everything is perceived, yet this perceiving is quite perceptionless. Maho, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. In the unmoving, all things come and go. Yet in that movement, nothing ever moves.
The Heart Sutra. The Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas, and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought, and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. So, in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought, or choice, nor is there consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing, no ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes of ignorance, no withering, no death, no end of them, nor is there pain or cause of pain, or cease in pain or noble path to lead from pain, not even wisdom to attain. Attainment too is emptiness. So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is free of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. Hear then the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantra, the prajna paramita, whose words allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhiswaha. Gate Gate Paragate Arasangate Bodhi Swaha Gate Paragate Arasangate Bodhi Swaha. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained
In my acting thus.
in my acting thus
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existence.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements
Are serviceable in many ways.
are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained
To peace.
to peace.
Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. 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 Om Tare Tu Re Swaha.
Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu Re Swaha. Om Tare Tu 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 Re 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 Swaha. Om Tare Tu Swaha. Very good. Lovely to do puja with you, and hope to see you tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock UK time.